Joining us right now from Jerusalem, Newsmax contributor Elliot Jager. Elliot, it's great to have you back with us.
John, it's good to be with you.
And so give us an on-the-ground assessment of what the mood is like right now in Jerusalem. I heard one report of a young woman who said this is, the people in Jerusalem are used to this type of thing. Is that really the case?
People are carrying on, but let me just give you a sort of a general synopsis of what's happening on a number of levels. First of all, just before we went on the air, the Israeli Defense Ministry announced that it was calling up another 8,000 reservists. That's on top of the 44,000 that have already been called up, and of course it's on top of the standing Israeli army. So that's just happened. Militarily, John, I think what's happening is the IDF is focusing primarily on northern Gaza, the northern Gaza Strip, which really abuts the area of Ashkelon and Ashdod, and that's because that is where the Israeli army thinks that the Hamas has most of its rockets that are being aimed deep toward northern Israel. We have the IDF has a real problem, though. The problem is that it has dropped leaflets urging the people in the northern Gaza area to shift south, and they're not doing it. Frankly, they're not doing it either because they don't want to or because they're intimidated by Hamas. This presents a real problem because of collateral damage, and in fact, again, just before coming on the air right now, we have a report of a tragedy of a number of children on a beach who were hit by an errant Israeli armament of some kind, and so we've got a real problem in terms of dealing in a very an area which is essentially an urban area. Mm-hmm. The army is saying that it really needs to get in on the ground in order to deal with the tunnels. Remember, the tunnels are where...
Yeah, all right. So let's talk about that specifically, because I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier in your response here, the buildup that we're seeing within the IDF forces here. What does that mean in a broader sense for the overall conflict between Hamas and Israel and the ongoing issue of a meaningful solution for peace if there is a ground invasion here?
Well, there's Hamas, as you know, John, is not interested in peace. There's no pretense of that with Mahmoud Abbas and the PLO. There's a pretense that they're interested in a deal. With Hamas, there's no such pretense. What has to happen is the army is saying, that is, sources in the army are saying that they need to go in on the ground and deal with the tunnels where the rockets are and where the munitions are stored. Netanyahu is extremely reluctant to make that move, and therein is where we stand right now, with the army poised out of Gaza, the Air Force doing everything it can within the confines of dealing with collateral damage and certain things, as you know, even a modern Air Force cannot do from the air. So I think that's sort of where we stand militarily. I'll tell you that diplomatically, John, what we're hearing from Europe and Western Europe, NATO, and is that, of course, Israel has a right to self-defense. We've had a number of foreign ministers here today. We have the Italian prime ministers here. We've had a number of foreign ministers, the Norwegian foreign minister. John, everyone says that Israel has a right of self-defense, but the sense among a lot of Israelis is that they're not serious. They're talking about passive self-defense. They're talking about it's okay to shoot down a rocket, but why don't you conduct your war against Hamas without any collateral damage, without any civilians getting hurt? And that's hard to do considering that Hamas uses human shields. So that's kind of where we stand diplomatically. Israel wants did want the ceasefire that the Egyptians proposed, something that you raised when we first began. The problem is Hamas didn't want the Egyptian proposal. And instead, Hamas would rather have Turkey and Qatar be the sort of mediators because, first of all, because Qatar picks up the tab for Hamas, and Turkey, of course, is extremely sympathetic to Hamas.
Well, you mentioned the diplomatic aspects of this. And I know this isn't directly a diplomatic situation, but of course it does speak to the message that Benjamin Netanyahu is trying to send as he tries to build partnerships and make the case for Israel's military activity here. He fired Deputy Defense Minister Danny Danon. Do you think that was the right move?
Well, I think it was the wrong move to hire him in the first place. This is the reason Danon was hired in the first place, or brought in that position in the first place, simply had to do with internal politics. Certainly not because he had anything to contribute to the defense portfolio. We have a fantastic defense minister in Moshe Ya'alon, former chief of staff, extremely accomplished. And so, the other fellow was simply a political baggage. And during the time of conflict, he turned against the prime minister publicly, and that's just not on.
So that's one move. And also, going back to something you mentioned before about the steps that the Israeli military is taking right now to send a warning to the folks in Gaza, the Gazans there, dropping the leaflets, but also doing text messages and social media and taking all types of steps here. Again, this is part of Israel's outward push to show that they're doing everything they possibly can to prevent those civilian casualties, because as we've seen in the past, Hamas uses those deaths for propaganda. Right.
Well, what's a paradox here is, of course, Hamas's every rocket is intended to cause civilian casualties. But what we do have is, obviously, we have a different situation with Israel purposefully trying to avoid civilian casualties. And I have to tell you, it's not easy to do that. We're fighting, that is, that Israel is fighting an enemy that uses human shields. And the latest word we have is that almost half of the 200 casualties on the Palestinian Arab side in Gaza are indeed civilians.
All right, well, Elliot, we got to wrap it up right there. Stay safe in Jerusalem while those rockets continue to rain down on Israel. We thank you for being with us here. Much more ahead here on America's Forum right after.